My parents spent 29 years treating me like I didn't exist. Then they found out I was a millionaire. Suddenly, I was their favorite child. I was sitting in my apartment in Seattle, staring at my phone, watching my father's name flash on the screen. He hadn't called me in 3 years. Not on my birthday. Not on Christmas. Not when I got promoted. Not when I launched my company. But today, he was calling. I already knew why. The tech blogs had picked up the story that morning. My startup had been acquired for $4.2 million. My name was in the headline. My face was in the article. For the first time in my life, I was visible. And now my father wanted to talk. I let it ring. 6 times. 7. Then I answered. His voice was warm in a way I hadn't heard since childhood, if I had ever heard it at all. He said it was so good to hear my voice. He said he had been meaning to call. He said he missed me. Then he said Julian was in trouble. He said they needed help. He said $50,000 would solve everything. I sat there in silence, listening to my father ask me for money he had never once offered me. Listening to him explain that Julian's business had failed again, that the creditors were calling, that they might lose the house if someone didn't step in. Someone, meaning me. The daughter they had ignored for 3 decades. Before I tell you everything, hit that subscribe button if you love stories like this, and drop a comment if you've ever felt invisible in your own family. I read every single one. My name is Margot. I'm 29 years old, and this is the story of how my family finally saw me and why I made them wish they hadn't. Let me start from the beginning. I grew up in a suburb outside of Cleveland, in a house with 4 bedrooms and a hierarchy that was never spoken but always understood. Julian was the prince. I was the afterthought. My brother was born 4 years before me, and by the time I arrived, the family's attention had already been allocated. Julian was the firstborn son, the heir to my father's expectations, the center of my mother's universe. He was charming and athletic and loud in all the ways that made adults pay attention. I was quiet, shy, the kind of child who read books in corners and didn't demand anything from anyone. My parents interpreted this as self-sufficiency. They said I was independent. They said I didn't need as much attention. They said Julian was more sensitive, more fragile, more in need of their support. What they meant was that Julian was more important. The favoritism was woven into everything. When Julian brought home a C on his report card, my parents hired tutors and adjusted his schedule and made sure he had every resource he needed to improve. When I brought home straight A's, they nodded and said that was nice and went back to discussing Julian's soccer practice. When Julian got into fights at school, my parents blamed the other kids. When I won the spelling bee, they forgot to attend the ceremony. When Julian wanted a car for his 16th birthday, my father took him to the dealership and let him pick out a brand new Mustang. When I turned 16, I got a card with $50 and a suggestion that I start saving for my own vehicle. I learned early that love in our family was a finite resource, and Julian had claimed all of it before I was born. My mother was the architect of this system. Diana had grown up believing that sons were more valuable than daughters. Her own mother had favored her brothers. Her own father had left everything to his male children. She had absorbed these lessons and passed them on without question. She never said it directly. She didn't have to. The message was clear in 1,000 small choices. Julian got the bigger bedroom. Julian got the better presents. Julian got the attention at dinner, the praise for minor accomplishments, the comfort when things went wrong. I got leftovers. When I tried to talk to her about it once, as a teenager, she looked at me with genuine confusion. She said she loved us both equally. She said I was imagining things. She said Julian simply needed more support because life was harder for him. Life was harder for him. The golden boy, with the new car and the paid tutors and the endless second chances. Life was so hard. I stopped trying to explain after that. My father was different, but no better. Victor wasn't cruel. He was simply absent, emotionally, if not physically. He went to work, came home, watched television, and occasionally emerged to dispense wisdom or discipline. His wisdom was always for Julian. Man to Man talks about business and ambition and building a legacy. His discipline was always for me. Reminders to be quiet, to be grateful, to stop causing problems. I never caused problems. That was the irony. I was the perfect child, obedient, accomplished, invisible, and my reward for perfection was being ignored. My father saw Julian as his heir. He saw me as someone else's future responsibility. A daughter was temporary. A daughter would marry and leave and become part of another family. A son would carry the name forward, so he invested in Julian. Every dollar, every hour, every ounce of attention. By the time I understood what was happening, the pattern was too deep to change. High school was when the gap became undeniable. Julian graduated with mediocre grades and a trail of disciplinary incidents. He had crashed his Mustang twice. He had been caught cheating on exams. He had coasted through 4 years on charm and our parents' interventions. And yet, when it came time for college, my parents sent him to a private university in California. Full tuition, room and board, spending money. A brand new car to replace the one he had destroyed. Total cost, over $200,000. I graduated 2 years later as valedictorian, National Merit Scholar, captain of the debate team, acceptance letters from schools I had dreamed about since childhood. My parents sat me down and explained that college was expensive. They said Julian's education had stretched the family finances. They said I was smart enough to figure it out on my own. They said scholarships existed for a reason. I asked if they had saved anything for me. My mother looked uncomfortable. My father looked at the floor. They had saved nothing. Every dollar had gone to Julian. I was 17 years old, and I finally understood the truth. I was not their daughter. I was a roommate they had tolerated for 18 years. I went to a state school on a full academic scholarship. I paid for my own textbooks, my own housing, my own food. I worked 2 jobs throughout college, one at the library, one at a coffee shop. I slept 4 hours a night and maintained a 4.0 GPA and never asked my parents for anything. They never offered. Julian, meanwhile, was failing classes and changing majors and calling home for money every month. He took 6 years to finish a 4-year degree. He graduated with a mountain of credit card debt that my parents quietly paid off. I graduated in 3.5 years with honors and a job offer in Seattle. My parents didn't come to my graduation. They said the timing was bad. They said flights were expensive. They said they would celebrate with me later. Later never came. I moved to Seattle a week after graduation. It was as far from Cleveland as I could get without leaving the country. I needed distance. I needed space to become someone who wasn't defined by her family's indifference. I got a job at a tech company, starting at the bottom, writing code and fixing bugs and learning everything I could about how software was built. I was hungry in a way that my coworkers didn't understand. I had something to prove, not to my parents, but to myself. I worked harder than anyone. I stayed later. I volunteered for projects no one else wanted. Within 2 years, I had been promoted twice. Within 3 years, I was leading a team. My parents never asked about my job. When I called home, which became less and less frequent, they talked about Julian, his new girlfriend, his new apartment, his new business idea that was definitely going to work this time. They never asked what I was building, so I stopped calling. The silence lasted almost 3 years. Occasionally, my mother would send a text on holidays. Occasionally, my father would forward a family photo. But actual conversation? Actual interest in my life? That didn't exist. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself I had built a new family, friends in Seattle, colleagues who respected me, a community that saw me as someone worth knowing. But late at night, alone in my apartment, I sometimes wondered what it would feel like to have parents who loved me, who asked about my day, who celebrated my wins, who showed up. I never found out. Julian's business failures became a recurring theme. My parents had given him $150,000 after college to start a restaurant. He had no experience in food service, no business training, no plan beyond a vague idea that restaurants were cool and he would look impressive owning one. It lasted 18 months. He lost everything. My parents, money, plus another $50,000 he had borrowed from friends and credit cards. My parents paid off the debt. They said it was a learning experience. They said he would do better next time. Next time was a real estate venture. Another $100,000 from my parents. Another spectacular failure. Another round of excuses about market conditions and bad timing and circumstances beyond his control. Through all of this, no one ever suggested that Julian get a normal job. No one ever suggested that he learn to support himself. He was 32 years old and had never worked for anyone but himself. Poorly, funded entirely by our parents. I was 28 and had been financially independent for 7 years, but I was the one they saw as the disappointment. I met Ravi at a tech conference in San Francisco. He was a developer like me, frustrated with the same problems I had been thinking about for years. We started talking over coffee and didn't stop for 6 hours. By the end of the night, we had sketched out an idea on napkins and agreed to keep in touch. 6 months later, we quit our jobs and started a company together. It was terrifying. I had savings, not much, but enough to survive for a year without income. I had skills that were in demand. And I had something else, the absolute certainty that no one was coming to save me if I failed. That certainty was a gift from my parents, though they didn't know it. They had taught me to rely on myself. They had shown me that family was not a safety net. They had made me strong by making me alone. I used that strength. The startup years were brutal. We worked out of a tiny apartment. We coded 18 hours a day. We pitched to investors who laughed at us, who told us our idea was too niche, who said 2 unknown developers couldn't compete with established players. We kept going. I didn't tell my parents. There was no point. They wouldn't have understood what we were building, and they certainly wouldn't have supported it. Their money was reserved for Julian's next failure, so I stayed quiet. I built my company in silence. I let them believe I was still just another cog in someone else's machine. After 2 years, we had our first major client. After 3 years, we had 20 employees, and a product that was changing how small businesses manage their operations. The acquisition offers started coming. We sold the company on a Tuesday in March, $4.2 million, split between me, Ravi, and our early employees. My share, after taxes and distributions, was $1.8 million. I was 29 years old and a millionaire. The tech blogs picked up the story because acquisitions in our space were rare. My name was mentioned. My photo was included. For one news cycle, I was visible to anyone who cared to look. My parents looked. My father's call came 3 days after the acquisition was announced. I hadn't heard his voice in years, but there he was, warm and friendly, acting like no time had passed, acting like he had always been interested in my life. He said he was proud of me. He said he had always known I would do great things. He said my mother was so excited to hear about my success. I waited. I knew the real reason for the call was coming. He said Julian was having some difficulties. He said the economy was tough. He said creditors were circling. He said they needed $50,000 to avoid losing the house that I had never been welcome in. The house where Julian still had his childhood bedroom preserved like a shrine, while my room had been converted to storage the month I left for college. They needed $50,000. From me, the daughter who had received nothing. I told my father I would think about it. Then I hung up and stared at the wall for an hour. The next few days were a fog. I tried to work, but my mind kept circling back to that phone call. The audacity of it, the casual assumption that I would help, the complete lack of awareness about the irony of the situation. They had given Julian everything. Cars, houses, businesses, second chances, third chances, infinite chances. They had given me nothing but criticism and neglect. And now that I had succeeded despite them, because of their absence, not in spite of it, they wanted a share. I thought about all the years I had spent hoping they would notice me, all the achievements I had accumulated, trying to earn their approval, all the silence that had answered my efforts. They had never seen me as an investment. They had seen Julian as an investment. I was just a daughter, temporary, forgettable, someone else's future problem. Now they wanted returns on an investment they had never made. I called my mother the following week. I didn't mention the money request. I just said I wanted to talk. I said I thought it was time for a family conversation. I said I had things I needed to say. My mother was thrilled. She said she had missed me. She said we should all get together. She said Julian and Chelsea would be there, and my father, and we could have a real family dinner for the first time in years. She didn't ask how I was doing. She didn't ask about the acquisition. She didn't congratulate me or express curiosity about my life. But she made sure to mention that Julian was really struggling, and it would mean so much to him if I could help. I said I understood. I said I would see them all on Saturday. I didn't tell her what I was planning. The week before the family meeting, I did something I hadn't done in years. I researched my brother. It wasn't hard. Julian had always been loud about his life. Social media posts, business announcements, interviews with local newspapers about his latest venture. He left a trail of public information everywhere he went. I spent 3 evenings piecing together the full picture of his financial history. What I found was worse than I had imagined. The restaurant failure had been just the beginning. After my parents bailed him out, he had tried a food truck. That lasted 8 months, then a catering company. 6 months, then a franchise opportunity that required $50,000 in fees. My parents paid. It collapsed within a year. The real estate venture came next. Julian had convinced my father that property was the path to wealth. Victor had given him another $100,000. Julian had bought 2 properties, mismanaged them completely, and sold them at a loss when the tenants stopped paying rent. Through it all, my parents kept writing checks. They refinanced their house twice, they drained their retirement accounts, they borrowed against my father's life insurance. Everything they had was now tied up in Julian's failures, and they wanted me to add my money to the pile. I found Chelsea's social media through Julian's profile. She was 30 years old, blonde, and photographed exclusively in expensive settings. Restaurants with white tablecloths, boutiques with designer logos, vacation resorts with infinity pools. Her post told a story of effortless luxury, but the comments told a different story. Friends asking when she was coming back to work. Family members making passive-aggressive remarks about spending. A general sense that the lifestyle she was displaying didn't match the reality underneath. I recognized the pattern. Chelsea had married Julian expecting a certain life. Julian had promised her that life. And now, as the money ran out, she was clinging to the image while everything crumbled beneath her. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I saw a post from 2 years ago. A photo of Chelsea and Julian at a charity gala, dressed in formal wear, holding champagne glasses. The caption read, "So grateful for family who supports our dreams." Family who supports our dreams. Meaning my parents. Meaning the money that should have been shared equally but went entirely to Julian. My sympathy evaporated. I called my mother midweek to confirm the Saturday dinner. She was nervous in a way I hadn't heard before. She kept thanking me for coming. She kept saying how much it meant to everyone. She kept mentioning how difficult things had been for Julian lately. I let her talk. I didn't interrupt. I didn't argue. She said Julian's latest business had some cash flow problems. She said the creditors were being unreasonable. She said it wasn't his fault. The economy was bad. The market was unpredictable. Circumstances were beyond his control. The same excuses. The same deflection. The same refusal to acknowledge that Julian had never succeeded at anything because he had never needed to. I asked how much they needed. She hesitated. Then she said 50,000 would help. But if I could do more, maybe 75 or even 100, it would really make a difference. $100,000 to bail out my brother for the 5th or 6th time. While I had received nothing, I told her I would see what I could do. She thanked me profusely. She said I was such a good sister. She said she always knew I would be there for family when it mattered. I hung up and stared at the wall. Family. When it mattered. As if the previous 29 years hadn't mattered at all. I spent Friday preparing. Not preparing money. Preparing words. I wrote everything down. Every gift Julian had received. Every opportunity I had been denied. Every time my parents had chosen him over me. Every check they had written to cover his failures. I calculated the totals. I verified the numbers. I built a case like I was presenting to investors. Clear, factual, impossible to dismiss. The restaurant, $150,000 plus $50,000 in debt payoff. The real estate venture, $100,000 plus losses. The franchise, $50,000. The cars, the apartments, the credit card bailouts, the wedding they had paid for entirely. Total investment in Julian, approximately $700,000 over 15 years. Total investment in me, 0. I printed 2 copies of the document, one for me, one to leave on the table when I walked out. Saturday arrived gray and cold. I drove to Cleveland in silence. No music, no podcasts, just the hum of the highway and the weight of what I was about to do. I hadn't been back to my parents' house in 4 years. The last visit had been a disaster. A Thanksgiving where Julian had announced his engagement to Chelsea, and the entire evening had revolved around wedding plans while I sat in the corner, forgotten. I had left early that night. I had driven back to Seattle and promised myself I wouldn't return. But here I was, returning. Not because I wanted to be part of the family, but because I needed to close a door that had been open too long. The house looked smaller than I remembered. It was a colonial in a neighborhood that had seen better days. The paint was peeling. The lawn needed work. The driveway had cracks that hadn't been there when I was a child. My parents were running out of money. I could see it in the deferred maintenance, the small signs of decline that accumulated when cash was tight. They had given everything to Julian, and now there was nothing left. I parked on the street and sat in my car for 5 minutes. breathing slowly, preparing myself. Then I walked inside. My mother met me at the door with a hug I didn't return. She looked older, grayer. The stress of the past few years had carved lines into her face that I didn't remember. She was wearing nice clothes, probably chosen to impress me, but they hung on her frame like she had lost weight she couldn't afford to lose. She said I looked wonderful. She said Seattle must agree with me. She said she was so proud of everything I had accomplished. Proud. Now, after 29 years of indifference. I thanked her and walked past her into the living room. Julian was already there. He was sitting on the couch with Chelsea beside him, both of them positioned like they were posing for a photograph. He had gained weight since I last saw him. His face was puffier. His clothes were expensive but ill-fitting. He looked like a man who was trying to project success and failing. Chelsea looked exactly like her Instagram photos. Polished, perfect, slightly artificial. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Her hand rested on Julian's arm in a way that seemed performative rather than affectionate. Julian stood up when I entered. He came toward me with his arms open, as if we were close, as if we had ever been close. He said it was so good to see me. He said I looked amazing. He said he had been following my success and was so impressed. Following my success. He had never once reached out to congratulate me. Not a text, not a call, not even a comment on the news articles. But now he was following my success. I let him hug me. I didn't hug back. My father emerged from the kitchen with drinks. Victor had aged more than my mother. His hair was completely gray now, and he moved with the careful slowness of a man whose body was beginning to fail him. He had worked hard his whole life, physical work, at jobs that wore men down, and it showed. He handed me a glass of wine and smiled like we were old friends. He said it was good to have the whole family together. He said it had been too long. He said he was glad I could make the time to come home. Home. This had never been my home. This had been Julian's home. I had just lived here. I took the wine and sat down in a chair across from everyone, deliberately separate, deliberately distant. Dinner was my mother's attempt at a peace offering. She had made my favorite meal from childhood, roast chicken with vegetables, mashed potatoes, apple pie for dessert. She had set the table with the good china. She had lit candles and arranged flowers. It was a performance. A carefully staged production designed to remind me that I was part of this family, that I belonged here, that they loved me. I saw through it immediately. The good china came out when they wanted something. The favorite meals appeared when they needed a favor. The warmth and attention that I had craved as a child were suddenly available now that I had money. I ate in silence while they filled the air with small talk. Chelsea dominated the conversation for the first hour. She talked about their apartment, their plans, their friends, their travels. She talked as if they were living a glamorous life, as if everything was perfect, as if her husband hadn't failed at every business he had ever started. Julian nodded along, occasionally adding details, mostly letting her speak. He seemed diminished somehow, smaller than the golden boy I remembered. The confidence that had carried him through childhood had curdled into something defensive and brittle. My parents watched them with expressions of strained hope. They wanted to believe the narrative Chelsea was spinning. They wanted to believe their investment would eventually pay off. I watched them all and felt nothing. The real conversation started after dessert. My father cleared his throat. My mother suddenly became very interested in her coffee cup. Julian shifted uncomfortably. Chelsea maintained her perfect smile. My father said he supposed I knew why they had asked me to come. He said the family was going through a difficult time. He said Julian's business had hit some unexpected challenges. I didn't respond. I let the silence stretch. My mother jumped in. She said the creditors were being aggressive. She said they might lose the house if they couldn't make certain payments. She said they had exhausted all their options. All their options. Meaning all the money they had already given Julian. Meaning the retirement accounts and the refinanced mortgage and the borrowed funds. Julian finally spoke. He said he knew he had made some mistakes. He said the market had been unpredictable. He said he just needed one more chance to turn things around. One more chance. After 5 failed businesses. After $700,000. One more chance. I looked at him steadily. I asked how much they needed. My father said $50,000 would help. But if I could do more, $100,000 would really stabilize everything. $100,000. The exact amount my parents had spent on Julian's real estate venture. The exact amount they had never offered me for college, for a car, for a house, for anything. I reached into my bag and pulled out the document I had prepared. I set it on the table between us. My mother asked what it was. I told her it was an accounting, a record of every dollar they had given Julian over the past 15 years, a comparison of what he had received versus what I had received. The room went silent. I walked them through it slowly. The restaurant, $150,000, plus the debt payoff. The real estate, $100,000. The franchise, $50,000. The wedding, $80,000. The cars, $45,000 for the Mustang in high school, another $30,000 for replacements over the years. The apartment deposits, the credit card bailouts, the emergency loans, $700,000, give or take. Then I showed them my column. College support, $0. My parents had told me to find scholarships. Graduation gift, $0. Julian had gotten a BMW. Wedding contribution, not applicable. I wasn't married. But I noted that they had spent $80,000 on Julian's wedding. Home purchase assistance, $0. Julian had received $120,000 for his down payment. Business investment, $0. I had built my company with my own savings and my own risk. Total investment in Margot, $0 and 0 cents. The silence lasted a long time. My mother started to speak. She said it wasn't fair to look at things that way. She said Julian had different needs. She said I had always been more capable, more independent, more able to take care of myself. I asked if that was why they hadn't come to my college graduation. She had no answer. I asked if that was why they had converted my bedroom to storage a month after I left. She looked away. I asked if that was why I had never received a single phone call in the past 3 years, until the day the tech blogs announced I was a millionaire. Julian muttered something about everyone being busy. I turned to him. I told Julian that I had spent my entire childhood watching him receive everything while I received nothing. I had watched our parents pour their resources into his failures while telling me I was smart enough to figure things out on my own. I told him I had figured things out. I had worked 2 jobs through college. I had built a career with no help from anyone. I had started a company from nothing and turned it into something valuable. And now that I had succeeded, they wanted me to bail out the brother who had never worked for anything in his life. I told him the answer was no. My father's face turned red. He said I was being selfish. He said family helped family. He said I had more money than I needed and they were struggling. I asked him where that principle had been when I needed help with college, when I needed a car, when I needed any support at all. He said that was different. I asked how. He couldn't answer. My mother started crying. She said she had always loved me. She said she had never meant to make me feel less important. She said if she had known I felt this way, she would have done things differently. I told her she had known. I had told her when I was 16. She had dismissed my concerns and gone back to focusing on Julian. She shook her head. She said she didn't remember that conversation. Of course she didn't. It hadn't been important enough to remember. Julian tried a different approach. He said we were family. He said he was sorry if things hadn't been equal. He said he would pay me back, with interest, as soon as his business turned around. I asked which business? The restaurant? The food truck? The catering company? The franchise? The real estate venture? Which one of his spectacular failures was going to generate the money to pay me back? He had no answer. Chelsea spoke for the first time since the conversation had turned serious. She said this was incredibly hurtful. She said I was being cruel to people who loved me. She said family wasn't supposed to keep score. I looked at her. I said I hadn't kept score. My parents had. They had invested $700,000 in Julian and $0 in me. That wasn't scorekeeping. That was a statement of values. And now I was making my own statement. I stood up. I told them I was leaving. I told them I wouldn't be giving them any money. Not $50,000, not $100,000, not a single dollar. I told them they had spent 29 years making it clear that I wasn't worth investing in. They had treated me like an afterthought, a lesser child, someone who didn't deserve the same love and support as their precious son. I told them they were right about one thing. I was independent. I was capable. I didn't need their help. But that meant they didn't get to need mine. I picked up my document from the table. I turned toward the door. My mother called after me. She begged me to stay. She said we could work this out. I didn't turn around. I drove back to Seattle that night, 8 hours through darkness and rain, with nothing but my thoughts for company. The conversation kept replaying in my head. My father calling me selfish. My mother crying. Julian promising to pay me back. Chelsea insisting that family doesn't keep score. They had kept score my entire life. They had just never counted me. By the time I reached my apartment, I was exhausted, but strangely calm. I had said what I needed to say. For the first time in 29 years, I had forced them to see me. Whether they understood what they saw was no longer my problem. The phone call started the next day. My mother called 6 times. I didn't answer. Her voicemails were filled with crying, apologizing, begging me to reconsider. She said they were desperate. She said they would lose everything. She said she couldn't understand how I could be so cold to my own family. Cold. After 29 years of being frozen out, she called me cold. My father called twice. His messages were shorter, angrier. He said I had embarrassed him in his own home. He said I had humiliated Julian in front of his wife. He said he had never expected this kind of cruelty from his own daughter. Julian didn't call, but Chelsea sent a long text about how I had ruined their family and proven I was exactly the kind of person my parents had always said I was. I read it once. Then I blocked her number. The updates came through family friends over the following months. Without my bailout, my parents couldn't make their payments. The creditors moved forward. By June, they had put the house on the market. It sold for less than they owed. After 30 years, my parents walked away with nothing. They moved into a small apartment in a part of Cleveland they had always looked down on. My mother went back to work at 61. Part-time retail, $12 an hour. My father's health declined from the stress. Nothing critical, but enough to humble him. I heard about it through a cousin, not from my parents directly. Julian's life collapsed faster. Without another bailout coming, the creditors closed in. He had to declare bankruptcy at 34 years old. Chelsea filed for divorce 3 weeks later. She had signed up for a certain lifestyle. When it became clear that lifestyle wasn't coming, she calculated her options and left. The divorce was quick. There was nothing to divide. She moved to Miami with a new boyfriend and never looked back. Julian moved back in with our parents, 34 years old. Bankrupt, divorced, living in his childhood bedroom in a cramped apartment. The golden boy had finally stopped shining. I didn't celebrate their downfall. Revenge fantasies are more appealing than revenge realities. In my imagination, watching them face consequences had been triumphant. In reality, it was just sad. These were broken people, living broken lives. I didn't regret saying no. They had never invested in me, so they had no right to expect returns. But I didn't celebrate their pain either. I just moved forward with my own life. I bought a house 2 years later, a craftsman bungalow in Seattle, with a garden and a porch where I could drink coffee in the mornings. I paid cash. No mortgage, no debt. No one could take it from me. The day I moved in, I sat on that porch and cried. Not from sadness, from relief. Everything I had, my home, my company, my savings, belonged to me because I had earned it. No one had given me anything, and no one could take it away. My mother called on my 32nd birthday. Her voice was different, smaller. The defensiveness I remembered had been worn down by years of difficulty. She didn't ask for money. She just said she was sorry. She said she had spent a lot of time thinking about what I had said that night. She said I was right about everything. The favoritism, the neglect, the 1,000 ways they had failed me. She didn't expect forgiveness. She just wanted me to know she finally understood. I thanked her for the apology. I told her I appreciated it. We talked for 20 minutes. Awkward, careful, 2 strangers finding common ground. When we hung up, something shifted inside me. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but something softer than the anger I had carried for so long. Julian emailed me 6 months later. He said he had been in therapy. He said he was working on understanding his patterns. He said he wanted to apologize for benefiting from a system that had hurt me. He didn't ask for money. He didn't make excuses. He said he was working now. A real job. For the first time in his life. Entry level at a logistics company. Less than I had made at my first job. But it was honest work, and he was proud of earning it himself. He said he didn't expect us to be close, but he wanted me to know that he finally saw me. He saw what I had accomplished, and he was genuinely proud to be my brother. I wrote back, brief, polite, open to the possibility of more. We exchanged a few emails over the following months. Nothing deep, just small steps towards something that might eventually become real. I'm 34 now. I have a successful company, a beautiful home, and more security than I ever imagined. I have friends who love me, a partner who sees me, and a life built entirely on my own terms. But the thing I'm most proud of isn't any of that. The thing I'm most proud of is that I learned to see myself. For 29 years, I was invisible. My parents looked through me. My brother didn't know I existed. I was the forgotten one, the afterthought, the child who wasn't worth investing in. I spent so long believing they were right, that I wasn't enough, that I had to earn love through achievement. It took years to unlearn those lessons, to understand that I was always enough, that their inability to see me was their failure, not mine. I don't need their approval anymore. I don't need anyone to tell me I'm worthy. I know it myself. If you're listening to this, maybe you grew up invisible too. Maybe you were the forgotten child. Maybe you spent years wondering what was wrong with you, why love seemed to flow to everyone but you. I want you to know something. There was never anything wrong with you. The people who couldn't see you, they were the broken ones. Their blindness said everything about them and nothing about your worth. You deserved better. You always did. And if you're still waiting for them to finally see you, I hope you find peace with the possibility that it may never come. But here's what I learned. You don't need them to see you. You can see yourself. So here's my question. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Were you the forgotten one while someone else got all the attention? Drop your story in the comments. You're not alone, and sometimes just sharing it helps more than you'd expect. And if you're a parent watching this, take a moment to think about your kids. All of them. Are you really seeing each one? It's not too late to change. Thank you for being here. Take care of yourself.